The Beatles' I Want You, She's So Heavy on the Abbey Road album is as arresting as it is ensnared in obsessive, intoxicating, and absorbing sensuous tension. With the exception of John Lennon's musique concrete sound collage that is Revolution 9, I Want You is not only the longest song in the entirety of the Beatles' catalogue, coming in at just under 8 minutes, but exhibits the very loudest single moment on Abbey Road, lyrics resonating like a mantra from John Lennon, Paul McCartney's fluttering bass, George Harrison and John Lennon's wall of electric guitar, and Ringo and Billy Preston's essential groovy cadence, all culminating into a 3-minute finale that succumbs to the oblivion of white noise, and then cuts off abruptly. This is perhaps the most experimental approach to blues we've ever seen from the lads from Liverpool, or anyone else. And today, we're going to show you 10 very interesting facts about the Beatles' I Want You, She's So. It probably won't surprise you to hear that John Lennon had mentioned on numerous occasions his desire to compose a quote, perfect song that only utilized a single word. And with that word, he would convey every emotion and meaning he couldn't with more words. It's exciting to wonder what John's one word might be, maybe the word love or perhaps peace. But for some reason, I always come back to the little word yes. What do you think? Well, in the fashion of being lyrically succinct, John elected to create I Want You that deployed only 15 words, many of which in repetition. Even Her Majesty had enlisted more words, and that song was only 23 seconds long. This poetic precision allowed John to manifest a song with only the words, I want you so bad, it's driving me mad, she's so heavy, babe, no, yeah. Similar to the chorus in the previous anthem, All You Need Is Love, John pens a commanding expression of his intense, ferocious, and direct lyricism, far removed from his usually obscure, kaleidoscopic references like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and I Am the Walrus. At this time period, John and Yoko had been experimenting with minimalism poetry, most notably Yoko's poem entitled Water, which reads, Water. End poem. This song spoke directly towards whom he was thinking of from the heart, the epitome of less is more. It has been mentioned, whether kindly or in jest, that Yoko Ono had a bewitching spell cast on John. He was profoundly enamored with Yoko from the day they met, and it was an all-consuming love for him. When he was with his first wife Cynthia, Yoko was on his mind. When he was studying transcendental meditation with a Maharishi in India, the ocean child called him. And even when he was near her, during the time of this song, 1969, John could never get close enough to the woman he loved. The late historian and music critic Ian MacDonald mentions that John's passion for Yoko had shaken him to his core. His long-dreamed-of erotic mother had finally arrived, and the reality was all too much for him. Sexually addicted to her, he was helplessly dependent. Lennon is literally obsessed. In our previous video, Happiness is a Warm Gun, John had revealed his carnal entanglement with Yoko, stating that in the beginning of his relationship, Yoko and he were very sexually oriented, and when they weren't in the studio, they were in bed. John was indeed creatively obsessed with Yoko as a songwriting subject, speaking to her, stating, I want you so bad, it's driving me mad, begging her in Don't Let Me Down to stay with him, and All I Want Is You in I Dig a Pony. She was his muse, repeating I want you over and over again, louder and more longing till John's voice shatters into a primal scream. Imagine you're the Beatles in the late 60s, quite literally the apple of, well, Apple. That's a terrible joke. And after all those years of climbing the ladder from dive bars in Hamburg to caverns in Liverpool, you still would be admonished by annoying neighbors who chose to live next to, wait for it, a rock and roll band. In February 1969, the Beatles began recording I Want You at Trident Studios in central London. After approximately 35 takes, we can hear one of these takes become interrupted in the 50th anniversary release of Abbey Road. I'll leave a link in the description. Associate producer Glyn Johns is heard whispering to John, asking, John? John says, yes, what? John, is it possible without affecting yourselves too much to turn down a little? Apparently, there's been a complaint. John says, from who? Glyn responds, from somebody outside the building. John says, what are they doing here at this time of night? What guy? Paul chimes in, it's his own fault for getting a house in such a lousy district. John replies, well, we'll try it once more very loud, and then if we don't get it, we'll try it quiet. Like it might do the other way, okay? The loud one, last go, last chance to be loud. Paul responds, who says? After taking the historic photo for the Abbey Road album cover, the Beatles go back into the studio. Running out of time to meet the release deadline, John has an idea for the end: white noise. More specifically from the George Harrison's monolithic instrument, the Moog synthesizer. John requested George bring in the beast and play around with it till it created that iconic white noise we hear growing at the end of I Want You. John says, "It's pretty heavy at the ending, because we use the Moog synthesizers on it, and the range of the sound is from minus whatever to way over. Well, you can't hear it. That instrument, the Moog synthesizer, can do all the sounds, all ranges of sounds. And we did that on the end. If you're a dog, you can hear a lot more." But not everyone was impressed with this extremely exotic approach to an ending. Paul McCartney seemed to be quietly at odds with what was happening to their song. Engineer Jeff Emmerich remembers that exact moment. Jeff says, "Lennon was so enamored of the white noise that George Harrison had overdubbed with his Moog synthesizer that he actually had Ringo supplemented by spinning the wind machine secreted in the Studio 2 percussion cupboard. As we sat in the control room mixing the track, he started becoming almost obsessed with the sound. Louder, louder. He kept imploring me. I want the track to build and build and build," he explained. "And then I want the white noise to completely take over and blot out the music altogether." I looked over at John as though he was crazy, but he paid me no mind. Over one shoulder I could see Yoko smiling, a taut little smile, her tiny teeth gleaming in the light. Over the other, I could see a dejected Paul, sitting slumped over, head down, staring at the floor. He didn't say a word, but his body language made it clear that he was very unhappy, not only with the song itself, but with the idea that the music, Beatles music, which he considered almost sacred, was being obliterated with noise. In the past, he would have said something, perhaps just a diplomatic, "Don't you think that's a bit too much, John?" But now, Paul seemed too beaten down to argue the point with a gleeful Lennon, who seemed to be taking an almost perverse pleasure at his bandmate's obvious discomfort. To Paul, it must have been like Revolution 9. All over again. John was deliberately distorting Beatles music, trying to turn the group into an avant-garde ensemble instead of a pop band. And I looked around the room. Ringo and George Harrison seemed to be into what John was doing. They had their eyes closed and they were swaying to the beat. It was just Paul, looking miserable, staring down at the floor. His isolation from the others never seemed more apparent. The white noise was a great effect, though the way that it kept just building and building rubbed me up the wrong way, both sonically and aesthetically. But it was John's song, and it was going to be done John's way, no matter what Paul or I, or anyone for that matter, thought. The Beatles weren't without criticism, and when the lyrics to I Want You came under scrutiny, John found himself defending his lyrical choices to those who couldn't see his overt love letter. Because of its minimalism, it was used as evidence that pop music was growing more and more vapid, as it was read on the BBC TV show 24 Hours. If they think those lyrics were banal, their heads would explode these days.
I don't even really want a spotlight, but they really put me in the limelight. Not around and then want a spotlight.
Cool. But John defended his approach to the economy of words in music with this response, stating, "Simplicity is evident in She's So Heavy. In fact, a reviewer wrote, he seems to have lost his talent for lyrics. It's so simple and boring. When it gets down to it, when you're drowning, you don't say, I would be incredibly pleased if someone would have the foresight to notice me drowning and come and help me. You just scream. In She's So Heavy, I just sang, I want you so bad. She's so heavy, I want you, like that." Art is an expression of oneself and is subject to the will of the artist. You experience art. You either enjoy it or you don't. But to dismiss it because it doesn't live up to your arbitrarily defined quota of words is asinine. Considering a song is composed holistically, you wouldn't dismiss Beethoven's The Fifth because his most iconic motif only used 3 notes. Oh dear reader, I'm appalled to declare that Beethoven has fallen from grace, wherewith his reversion to mindlessly plodding upon his piano. If only I could be like our disgraced composer upon hearing the Fifth. Deaf. Words are powerful when used effectively, such as the case in this word. Moving on. In the 1962 hit single Coming Home Baby, released by Mel Torme, is incredibly reminiscent to the vibe of I Want You. Take a listen.
I'm coming home, baby, now.
With a remarkably elevated return to blues plus wild experimentation, the Beatles moved about effortlessly on their respective instruments, and John's riff that accompanies his vocals is no exception. George Harrison comments on Lennon's brilliance by stating, "This is good because it's really basically a bit like a blues. The riff that he sings and plays is really very basic blues type stuff. But again, it's very original to a John type song, and the middle bit is great. John has an amazing thing with his timing. He's always comes across with sort of different timing things. For example, All You Need Is Love, which just sort of skips beat out and changes from 3/4 to 4/4, all in and out of each other. But when you question him as to what it is, he doesn't know. He just does it naturally." And this has got the bridge section of this is a bit like that, and it's got a really very good chord sequence that he uses. Speaking of heavy, this episode wouldn't be complete without addressing that word and its usage in the song. No, it isn't very likely John was commenting on his awe at the size of that lass, you absolute unit, but heavy was a slang term in the 60s that was used pretty ubiquitously. In Kevin Howlett's liner notes for the 50th anniversary Abbey Road box set, he defined heavy as meaning intense, meaningful, and momentous. But the inclusion of She's So Heavy on the song, originally titled simply I Want You, wouldn't come till a bit later, during recording. One awesome quick fact is that though this song was never played live by the Beatles or even by John in his solo career, when the Beatles performed at their rooftop concert, you can clearly hear John playing I Want You on the guitar between songs, giving listeners a taste of what's to come. It's like a Beatles Easter egg.
Excuse me, ma'am. Do you know what you're listening to at the moment here?
I don't know, I don't really.
You don't know?
No. Is it the Beatles?
There's been a fun little assertion that after John performs his blood-curdling scream of yeah towards the end of the song, that someone hollers back at him in a disapproving tone, possibly shut up. It's basically unintelligible no matter how many times I listen to it, but someone is definitely saying something. But in Mark Lewinson's book, The Complete Beatles Recording Sessions, he puts this myth gently to rest by saying, "There remains to this day a myth about I Want You, She's So Heavy, that one can hear a muffled shout of disapproval from the control room after John Lennon, all but tearing his larynx to pieces, shouts yeah. The interference being that someone was instructing John to keep his voice down. Never, never would anyone have issued such an instruction about a vocal in such a fashion. Close scrutiny of the original Trident tapes reveals the indecipherable shout to belong to a fellow Beatle off microphone, and that it was certainly not one of disapproval. Yeah, maybe a Beatles could ask one of them to be quiet, but I don't imagine anyone but perhaps George Martin scolding the band like that. And to really send it home, when engineer Jeff Jarrett discovered that some overdubs were getting some weird pickups in the mix, he asked George to turn it down a little bit, and George Harrison looked at him and said dryly, "You don't talk to a Beatles like that." When recording the backing track to the song, the Beatles played on and on for quite a while, making all the engineers assume that there would be a standard fade-out conclusion. Oh boy, this sure as hell wasn't. John let the tape play so long that it was just 20 seconds from breaking down, and hollered, "Cut the tape here!" To which Jeff Emmerich replied, "Cut the tape?" He said they had never ended abruptly like that. Even though he protested John's outlandish way to end a side of an album, John was a leader and said, "You heard what I said, Jeff. Cut the tape." Now, what to do? How exactly should we end this video? Maybe a little white noise? Can you still hear me? You heard what I said, Jeff. Cut the tape.